Leslyn Lewis, who confirmed that she will run for the Conservatives in the next federal election after placing third in last weekend's leadership race. Lewis went from being a relatively unknown political player to a strong contender over the course of that contest. Though she didn't win the race, she did win the popular vote on the second ballot, receiving 35.2% of votes compared to Erin O'Toole's 33.5% and Peter MacKay's 31.6%, as you can see on the screen right there. Despite popular support, she was third in the party's weighted point system. It dropped her from the ballot, and her supporters ultimately helped deliver Erin O'Toole his win. Leslyn Lewis joins us now. Hi, Miss Lewis. Good to welcome you back to the program.
Hi, Vassie. Nice to be back with you.
First off, congratulations on your campaign. I know you put out a release the other day saying that you do plan on running for the Conservative Party in the next election. Have you decided where?
No, Vassie, I haven't decided where yet. I've had dozens of ridings reach out to me and ask me if I would consider running in their riding. And I've narrowed it down, and I think I'll be making a decision next week. But I have to talk to my children and work a few things out related to my family, and I'll make the best decision for my family and for the party and for the country.
So you mentioned deciding next week. You've got to talk to your family. What kind of factors will determine, I guess, for you or go into that decision?
Well, if I were to just look for my own interest, Vashi, I would probably pick Alberta and Saskatchewan because those are the safest ridings. However, I do have to think about my youngest child, who's 15, and he's a high-performance athlete. And so I want to find an area that will be able to have a good school, great academics, but also optimize his potential with respect to his athletics.
So there is the possibility that you might choose something closer to home where you are now, something in Ontario? You haven't ruled that out?
No, I am definitely looking at options in Ontario also, and that's all that I think is more suitable for my family situation. However, there are a number of factors that I'm taking into consideration. The West was very warm and welcoming to me, and so it's something I'm seriously considering also.
Did you know immediately following the end of the campaign that you wanted to run as a candidate in the next election, or was that something that you discussed with Mr. O'Toole in your phone call? How did that decision come about?
Well, I knew in my heart that there was work that I started that I wanted to complete, and that the only way to do that was to run again. But I did have that discussion with Mr. O'Toole also, and he was very encouraging.
Did he make, I guess, any promises of a certain level of profile in the party or a certain role should you run, anything like that?
No, I'm not that type of person that would put out an ask. I believe that everything that I gain, I should earn it. And so I even said to him that I'm open to running a contested nomination, and I didn't want to be granted a seat. I wanted to work for whichever riding I picked, that I would be open to a nomination, and I would welcome anybody who wishes that they want to challenge me in that riding.
Why is that important to you?
I think it's important because we've had issues in our party about fixed nominations and people just distrusting the system. And I think that as leaders, we have to make sure that we instill trust in the system. And so for someone who was a leadership candidate, I would not want to put Mr. O'Toole in a situation where I am asking him to do something that could, jeopardize the transparency of our system.
You mentioned Alberta and Saskatchewan. You won Saskatchewan. You came in second in Alberta. Your supporters, essentially, on the second and third ballot are what propelled Mr. O'Toole to his victory, in large part. What should Mr. O'Toole take from that?
Well, I think that Mr. O'Toole, like other Canadians, will understand that we have a broad-based party, and our party is comprised of people with differing opinions and perspectives, and they'll coalesce around a particular candidate, but they will also be warm to other candidates that are respectful towards their views.
And when you say respectful towards their views, what do you mean? And I'm asking because I remember doing an interview with you months back where you had come out with an ad very critical of Peter MacKay at the time because, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the substance of the ad was that Mr. MacKay, you didn't feel was, or you did feel was sort of saying to social conservatives, park your views. During this campaign, we shouldn't make them a point of conversation because that will provide our competitors with ammunition, basically, against us. Do you feel differently about Mr. O'Toole?
Well, I don't feel that Mr. O'Toole would not consider other people's perspective, and I know that he's respectful of various perspectives, and he shares the same philosophy with me that we have a big tent party. And in fact, conversations that I've had with Mr. MacKay, he's also shared those opinions with me also.
Do you regret then criticizing him so publicly during the campaign?
Oh, I didn't publicly criticize Mr. MacKay. I played a video, an audio of his words, and I personally believe that perhaps he was getting advice on that front. And when I spoke to him, it was a different person. It was a person who was very open-minded, open to other perspectives. And I think his initial advice at the beginning of the campaign differed from, the time that I met with him in July, and he was very open and respectful to our big tent party.
So you don't feel, because that ad and our conversation back then was pretty specific, it was critical of Mr. MacKay. You felt like he was telling people like yourself and those who support you and your values that you shouldn't discuss them in the campaign. Are you saying that isn't true?
No, I'm not saying that I'm backtracking on anything. What I'm saying is that his words were his words. I was critical of his words. Once I had an opportunity to sit down with him and to discuss it, it was clear that perhaps in a speech, sometimes you go off track. And that was the indication that I got from him, is that wasn't the message he wanted to deliver. The delivery came out in a different way than he had intended, but he's very open-minded. He's very respectful of people with other views, as is Mr. O'Toole.
And Mr. O'Toole, during his press conference a few days ago, did talk about that, right? Of being sort of able to have differing points of view and respect the other person. His viewpoint on a number of issues, though, is not so-called socially conservative, right? He talked at length during that press conference about his voting record as being pro-choice and how long and clear that record had been. Do you have any concerns around that specifically? And do you feel like your views will be represented by the party under the leadership of Mr. O'Toole?
Yeah, my only concern is that in a free and democratic society that we're still talking about people having differing views. I think that we need to move beyond that narrative. People are individuals and they're entitled to their opinions. And Mr. O'Toole is a professional, his opinion, whatever that be, and he will always act in the best interest of the country, just like I would. So I see his opinion as no different than how I would see myself having an opinion and making sure that I implement the best policies for the country. And I have no doubt that Mr. O'Toole is going to do that.
What do you make of the argument being put forth, or the ask being put forth by some Liberals, that Derek Sloan, for example, who was criticized during the campaign for the way in which he articulated some opinions, including around Dr. Tam, the Chief Public Health Officer of this country, that he be removed from caucus or that he be denounced by Mr. O'Toole? What should Mr. O'Toole do there, do you think?
Well, the Liberals have far worse problems to deal with. They've misappropriated in some ways $500 billion, and Mr. Trudeau should worry about his own caucus. Derek Sloan was elected, and if the members of his constituents feel that they no longer want him, it's up to them to vote him out. And I believe that, an election will decide that. I don't believe that leaders should be telling people, the electorate, who is worthy of that particular seat when they've been voted in. And as I said, the Liberals have their own issues to contend with.
Yeah, I don't take away at all from the fact that Liberals do, and we have many of them on this program, and rightfully they should be questioned about about those positions as well. But respectfully, on the subject of Mr. Sloan, and again, I take your point on elections and the deciding factor there. But some of the things that he has said, in particular, using really a racist trope to question the loyalty of, or in questioning the loyalty of Dr. Tam. There were members of the Ontario Conservative caucus who wanted him to apologize, wanted something to be done, and nothing was done. Do you think that he crossed a line and there should be consequences beyond just an election for that?
Well, yes, I think there are a number of Liberals who've crossed lines, and I think that Liberals have in their party people who are currently being investigated for harassment. And so I think that they should really look into that. With respect to Derek Sloan, I may not have chose his language. He clarified that he did not intend any racial animus because of that. And that was left as is during the leadership race. So, as I said, it's the electorate that should decide whether or not he should run again.
Respectfully, he clarified, but he wouldn't apologize, and it was perceived by a lot of people, that initial comment, as racist. But I do want to move on and ask you about sort of one more topic before I let you go, and I do appreciate you sharing your time with us this evening, and that is specifically, we covered the debates here, we carried them live on this show and on this network rather. And I remember specifically your comments around systemic racism and the resonance that had with a lot of people who were watching at the time. We obviously are in a moment in society right now where that issue is very live, right? And it always has been, but everyone is very conscious of it, and we're watching a lot of things unfold south of the border, although in a different context to a degree than they are here. And there are a lot of questions and comments around that. I'm wondering what you think or what you hope your party does about that.
Does about what?
About systemic racism.
In what way? Like, what do you mean?
In the ways, for example, right now when it comes to police officers, right? And the use of brutality against, Jacob Blake over the weekend south of the border. That has led to a conversation here about some disproportionate outcomes for people of color, for Indigenous people in this country. You spoke about it at length during the debate. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious what you hope your party pursues in that vein.
Yes, so I think it's very important that when you're talking about systems, people understand the definitions, that it does deal with outcomes. And many people get confused when I say that, and they think that I'm saying that all outcomes have to be equal, irrespective of the input. And so I think that we have to clarify the definition of what systemic racism is. But specifically with respect to my party, I believe that my party believes that all professionals should have proper training. And if there's a point in time or incidents occur where we believe that the training needs to be improved in whatever aspect, whether it's use of force, we could always invest in that and make sure that police officers have proper resources and proper training to deal with various incidences, including the heightened tensions around COVID and racialized situations.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Ms. Lewis. I appreciate your time as always. And again, congratulations on your campaign.
Thank you, Vashi. Thank you so much.
Former conservative leadership candidate, I should say, Leslyn Lewis there on how her socially conservative beliefs can coexist with Erin O'Toole's more progressive views. Lewis's supporters chose O'Toole over Peter MacKay as their second and third choice on the ranked ballot, giving O'Toole the win in large part. So how much sway will Lewis have in the Conservative Party going forward? It's time for the Power Panel to weigh in on that. Over in Denom, Quebec tonight, David Hurley, partner in the Gandalf Group and host of the Hurley Burley podcast. In Toronto, David Tarrant is with Enterprise Canada. And Andrew Thompson, Chief of Government Relations for University of Toronto, is also a former Saskatchewan Finance Minister. Emily Nicolas is a columnist with Le Devoir, and she joins us from Montreal. Hi, everybody. Great to see you.
Hello.
David, let me start with you. I know that you were watching the leadership as closely as everyone on this show, David Tarrant, I should say, on this show. I'm wondering what you think of Leslyn Lewis, and she says she's going to decide next week where she's running. What sort of, I guess, influence might she have on the party going forward?
Oh, I think she has a potential to have an enormous influence. I think she has, on one hand, she's broken the mold for, say, a stereotype of what people who have, say, culturally conservative or socially conservative views, what they look like, what they sound like, how they present their views. There's a lot of people in Canada who have these kind of views. and they've been looking for a champion who can actually respectfully and with compassion and consideration put those views in the public domain. But beyond that, let's avoid caricaturing Ms. Lewis. She also proved to be an exceptionally adept campaigner and making a really sincere and fundamentally authentic connection with voters and members of the party across the country. That's a gift. She is a remarkable woman, an accomplished woman, who's actually proved to be also a remarkable political talent. And that if she shows that same kind of discipline and same kind of authenticity in the general election that she did in the leadership, it bodes well for the Conservative Party.
The campaign, David Hurley, sure was something. Her campaign sure was something. I mean, 4 months ago, 6 months ago, a lot of even Conservative Party members weren't aware of her. And she ended up coming in second in Alberta, first in Saskatchewan. What's your take on that campaign and how she, I guess, capitalizes on it in the future for the party, like for her own role in the party?
Well, I don't think there's anybody can take anything away from her campaign. It may be that she benefited from some lack of enthusiasm about the two frontrunners in the race, but nonetheless, she went from, as you said, a complete standing start to getting a phenomenal number of votes. Just even financially and organizationally, you wouldn't think something like that was possible. So I'm really impressed with what she did. Going forward, I think that her being a profile person in the party is unquestionably helpful for them, especially unquestionably helpful in urban Canada, where people want to see a party that's more reflective of the society in which they live, and the Conservatives can sometimes look awfully white and male in that regard. So I think that she's definitely helpful. On the other hand, she's a clear and strong representative of social conservative views, which are at the core of the roadblock between urban and some suburban voters and the Conservative Party. And that's not going to go away. And Mr. O'Toole's going to have to make a choice about this, because people don't believe in compromise on values issues by and large. They're not amenable to compromise. And so people at the end of the day, you're still going to be faced in an election campaign with a question: are you unequivocally pro-choice? Is there any chance that there will be any legislation brought in that subject? That's just a test that's going to be asked, and it doesn't matter who you are if you fail that test. In my view, some of these things are litmus tests for most voters.
Well, it's interesting. I'll go to you, Emily, and David Tarrant. I'm sure you want to respond to that, so I'll get you in a second as well. But the answer, Emily, that I played there from Ms. Lewis was in response to a question around, she had sort of really campaigned a little bit at the beginning, at least, on Peter MacKay, saying, and put out some negative messages on Peter MacKay, saying that he wanted social conservatives to kind of park their views in order to avoid the criticism that they would normally receive from their competitors, right? Like not to hand that over to their competitors. She was critical of that. She a little bit walked it back today when she said she spoke to Mr. MacKay and he didn't espouse those views in person. But Mr. O'Toole is similar to Mr. MacKay in that, he came out in his press conference, he said, I have a clear pro-choice voting record. And my question to her was sort of, does she ever worry about that same sentiment that she expressed over Mr. MacKay with Mr. O'Toole? And she said she didn't. But to David Hurley's point, is that a possible point of tension going forward?
Of course, after a leadership race, everybody's trying to reconcile. Obviously, people have to attack each other, at some degree during the race itself, and then everybody's saying it's not so bad. And this is the way it wasn't so bad after all, and this is the way it goes on after any leadership race. At the same time, there's a difference between campaigning inside the Conservative Party and in a general election, and that is that when you can talk about we're a big tent and we need to not hide those social conservative views within the Conservative Party. It's harder to do in a general election when basically you have to win the votes of the right wing, basically, of the Liberal Party, people who are hesitating. And that's when it gets tricky. If you think that social conservatives are going to vote for the Conservatives anyway, they might not exactly like O'Toole as much as they would have liked another candidate, but they will vote for them anyway. During an election campaign, they're more likely to just put that on the back burner because they're in to win votes that are not taken for granted, basically. So of course she wants to be influential, and we'll see how that goes. But that's the reality of general elections as well, that people tend to campaign to the center a little bit more.
Well, and we certainly have heard from Mr. O'Toole in his two sets of public remarks so far, Andrew, a very specific message that he wants to appeal to the voters, the sort of softer Liberal voters, let's say, or softer even NDP voters, as he pointed out, that might not have looked to the Conservative Party before, but he was very clear about wanting to attract them to the party under his leadership. How does that play into what we were just discussing, do you think?
Well, there's no doubt what they need to do, and I think what Aaron O'Toole is trying to do is to establish the Conservatives again as a Big Tent party. And they are probably more prone than most parties to being taken over by the social conservative wing or the more radical wings that all parties have of one form or another. And when that happens, they end up with a fracture, and that fracture tends to be an east-west fracture. It's a social conservative pragmatist fracture. It's a reform conservative fracture. And I think that, as he's gone through this cycle now twice, running for leader, he's keenly aware of how strong those social conservative values are in the prairies in particular, but also understands that you cannot win in the rest of the country if those are front and center. And it really doesn't matter whether those views are carried by Stockwell Day or whether they're carried by Leslyn Lewis. Those views are an anathema to the majority of Canadians. And so I think what he's trying to do is say there's always going to be room in the Conservative Party for those views, but that at this point, under his leadership, it's going to be a much more mainstream party.
David, Taryn, I'll give you the last word. To Ms. Lewis's credit, she wasn't, she certainly didn't seem to say at all that, hey, I gave him a lot of support, my supporters did, so my views should be front and center. She seemed to express the view that she just wants those viewpoints respected. But she didn't sort of issue any kind of ultimatum or anything, and I asked, a couple of times, and not at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fundamental misread some people have of social conservatives in the country. Right. A leader can be pro-choice, and Mr. O'Toole came out and say he's clearly pro-choice, while still respecting the fact that many people, including MPs and millions of Canadians, actually have religious, faith-based, social conservative views, and they want to be able to not be chased from the public square, to actually have a fair hearing, the same way if you're a libertarian or if you're a Bay Street conservative or whoever you are, they want to be able to be treated like they're not the boogeyman. And the fact of the matter is, the only party in Canada that doesn't treat people of faith like second-class citizens is the Conservative Party. And I think to attack Ms. Lewis and to go and attack social conservatives, let's be clear, what you're attacking is people for their faith. And if you attack Ms. Lewis for her ethnicity, you're racist. If you attack her for her gender, you're a sexist. But apparently the Liberal Party believes that's fair game to attack her for her faith. That's just a different kind of bigotry, Vashi.
Do you think they're attacking? I haven't seen attacks
Absolutely.
on her. Right now, their focus is Derek Sloan.
Yeah, well, listen, Mr. Sloan's a different kettle of fish altogether, as they say out east. Ms. Lewis has been nothing but respectful and considerate in how she espouses her views, which are rooted in her religious convictions. If you're attacking her, you're attacking those religious convictions, and you're attacking the religious convictions of many Canadians. The Liberal Party is okay playing games with treating people of faith.
What does it mean to give it a fair hearing, David?
I'm going to give it. Don't worry. I know everyone. Guys. Sorry, you have to stop talking. I apologize. Only because we're on Skype. So as soon as someone cuts someone off, you can't hear anybody. I promise. I was going to switch to a different topic. I will not. So I'll just let David Tarrant finish, and then I'll get each of you to weigh in on that point. David, go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, listen. This isn't social issues like abortion cut to the quick of so many people, but for many people, it's motivated by their faith. And if you want to equate someone who has a faith-based position on an important social issue as being somehow bigoted or intolerant, then you yourself are practicing a form of bigotry and intolerance. There's a way to respectfully ensure that these people have a fair hearing. Mr. O'Toole is prepared to do it while ensuring that his government and party agenda will be fundamentally pro-choice. It's a false binary to assume that's not possible.
Okay, now I'll get to everyone else who is at the edge of their seat waiting to jump in. David Hurley, go ahead.
To me, that's the same sucking and blowing that cost them the last election and hurts them in almost all elections. The bottom line is it's not attacking anybody for their faith. People are allowed to believe what they want to believe, but most Canadians don't want a government that will roll back abortion rules and criminalize abortion. Most Canadians don't want to roll back the rights that gay people have achieved in this country. And so I don't care what you want to say about what is big tent or what works internally or what's appropriate, but that's the reality of voting in this country. And when you say to people, we think social conservatives should get a fair hearing, I want to know what that means. Are you blowing them off and saying they get to have a voice, but we disregard it? Or, as Canadians want to know, is that going to be a real voice inside decision-making in the Conservative Party that could potentially result in the rollbacks of some of these progressive changes in our society? People want to know, and they'll vote a certain way based on it.
David, I'll get you to respond to that in a second, but Andrew wants to jump in as well.
I do want to jump in.
I mean, listen. Sorry.
Go ahead. I'll get Andrew first, and then I'll jump back.
Okay.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I just want to make this point. I don't want people to fall off their high horses here, but I mean, these views are held within a number of parties. Let's remember, it was only a year ago that Prime Minister Trudeau was finally forced to say that he had changed his view from being pro-life, anti-choice, to being pro-choice. That was within the last 12 months in the Liberal Party. So we had a Prime Minister that was pro-life. We had a health minister he'd appointed who was pro-life, and allowed the erosion of access to abortion in the country. Now, did that become the major theme of that election? No. Did anybody believe that that was the over-consuming view of the Liberal Party? No. And I think that that's what you're seeing Erin O'Toole try to do with the Conservatives, is put them into that same position. Now, parties like the NDP are much clearer in terms of what their views are on minority rights, on issues of choice. And I think you see that also with the Bloc. That's not necessarily true with the Liberals and Conservatives, but I don't think we should get caught up in somehow thinking that one voice is going to overtake the other. It's how they coexist that really becomes the issue for the party.
Emily?
I just reacted when I heard that Conservatives are the most respectful in everyone's faith. I just remember very clearly the no-fly list and the barbaric cultural practices and everything that had to do with subtle Islamophobia. So I will take, if you were talking about Christian values, then yes. That's all I got to say about that.
Okay, let me circle back to David Tarrant and end the conversation here. I think obviously this shows what a politically hot button issue it is. It was in the last election. I guess to take away from the actual to move away for a second from the issues, based on Mr. O'Toole was infinitely more clear in his press conference today, or the other day rather, than Mr. Scheer was. And ultimately, I guess, speaking, as part of this discussion, is that enough to move away from some of the vulnerabilities that clearly the party had in the last election around these issues?
Well, listen, Bashi, the Liberals will try to do what David Hurley just did and portray any attempt at nuance or willingness to hear their points of view as a runaway freight train to banning abortion and cracking down and canceling same-sex marriage, whatever foolishness that the Liberal attack ad machine can. Just
to interrupt for a second, my question though was in the that's fine, and I get that there's a debate from you guys will debate that, and in the last election that worked to an extent though, right? Like Mr. Scheer was not able to answer those questions
because Andrew Scheer handled the question horribly. He was also a man of pro-life convictions who was deeply uncomfortable talking about them on the public stage, and that made him look disingenuous and made him look squirrely. And the fact that he wasn't prepared to actually speak out for what he believed in, which we would have attacked for, made him look like he had something to hide. You get attacked if you're being attacked for having a hidden agenda, you can't look like you're having a hidden agenda. Mr. O'Toole's come out clearly. He's pro-choice. He wants to lead a pro-choice government. All he's saying, all Ms. Lewis is saying, is that people actually have religious convictions on this very important moral and faith-based issue, that they be allowed to say their piece and not be silenced. To Andrew's point, the Liberal Party has banned people from pro-life from running for their party, right? If you have a religious conviction that believes in rights for the unborn, you're not allowed to run for the Liberal Party. So you can actually be pro-choice and say, you know what, I recognize this issue is important to people on the other side. They deserve to have their moment in the public square, and that actually is a workable compromise. But You are going to get attacked by the Liberal Party because there are votes to be won and shaken from the tree on it. That's part of politics. But quite frankly, if you want to build a bigger tent, it has to be a bigger tent on all sides.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time. I feel like this discussion could go on for a very long time, though, and I did not expect it to get as heated as it did, but I appreciate all of you participating in it. As always, great panel. Thank you. Thanks to David Tarrant, David Hurley, Emily Nicola, and Andrew Thompson.